Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Health Matters. My name is Carl Sterling and I'll be your host. Always great to be here. You know, a lot of times in the beginning of these shows, we have a bunch of stuff we want to get to, updates and this and that. But today, we're going to get right down to business. We have a very special guest joining us today. Before we introduce our guest, I want to tell you about the book of the week. The name of the book is 10% Happier. And the podcast of the week this week is 10% Happier, Dan Harris. Well, that's because we have a very special guest, and his name happens to be Dan Harris, the Dan Harris. Many of you know him as a renowned journalist, as a co-anchor, former co-anchor of ABC's Nightline and Good Morning America. But beyond his successful career in broadcasting, he has become an advocate for mindfulness and meditation. And this is spurred by his personal journey with anxiety, which I look forward to hearing from him about because I have my own anxiety. A lot of us have our own anxiety, so we want to bring this element to the show. Without further ado, welcome Dan Harris. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Dan, longtime fan here you're talking to. Many years of watching you on the news, and boy, you've been around and traveled so much and seen so much, and from front line of different events here and there, and the Dalai Lama, and you name it. So one of the things I love about your book is you mentioned, well, actually, let's go back. I know you've talked about this a lot. At a point way back, you had a panic attack in front of millions of people on live television. I forget what it was, 5 million people or something like that. Can you tell us, I mean, what was that like for you?
Yeah, happy to. 5.019 million. That's the exact number. It was on
Oh
Good Morning
my.
America almost exactly 20 years ago. A little bit. It was June of 2004. I was I was the guy who was supposed to come on at the top of each hour, the 7 o'clock hour and the 8 o'clock hour, and read the headlines to do a news update. And a few seconds into uh, my my time, I started to freak out. My lungs seized up, my heart started racing, my palms got sweaty, my mouth dried up, my mind was racing, and yeah, that's what a panic attack is like.
Yeah.
And as you're nodding your head, and so I had to do this. One of the things about anchoring the news is you need to be able to breathe to do it. And since I couldn't, I had to kind of squeak out a back to you to the main anchors of the show, Diane Sawyer and Charlie Gibson, and it was pretty horrible and humiliating. Uh, the good news, though, is that experience landed me in a psychiatrist's office and started me on therapy, and that ultimately led me to meditation.
That's great, man. I mean, what an experience. I mean, I saw a clip of that and I was empathizing and thinking about, what I just what you were going through, having my own experiences here and there. Um, I don't know if this is appropriate to say or not. I feel like mine's on a small scale in comparison, but it wasn't in front of millions of people. It was in front of my wife,
Mm, mm.
agonizing over a plane going to London that I thought I was going to miss. I mean, how ridiculous is that? But this panic stuff is real, though. The anxiety is real no matter what. And what was your first step towards addressing this?
Well, just to say, I mean, you're saying it's ridiculous, but and that it's small. It's never small to the person experiencing the panic,
No, it's not.
and it's a physiological um, dynamic panic. There's as you know, there's a massive release of adrenaline and cortisol into the brain, and the body, it sets off a chain reaction in the body, and so you can call it ridiculous if you want, and maybe from the outside it would seem not worthy of a panic attack, but there's a lot of there are many an infinite number of conditions that are creating that situation for you, and so yeah, I would urge you just not to judge yourself and anybody listening. If you've got panic, it's a real thing, and it needs to be taken care of.
Absolutely. And we're in a fast-paced society. There's a lot of pressure. I think social media has added an element of anxiety for a lot of people, um, in some way or another. Maybe keeping
Yeah.
up with somebody, you're trying to be like somebody you're really not. It took me forever to figure out who I'm not to be who I am, which, it's nice to know who you are. Um, so your first step though, tell us about like this happened, and was it right that evening, like after that news broadcast, that a realization came about, like I got to do something, or was it accumulation, or and what was the first step actually towards dealing with it?
Well, I don't know how detailed to get here, but there were actually two panic attacks, one in '04 and one in '05. My mom caught both of them, even though the my team didn't know what was happening. And I kind of, honestly, if I'm being honest with you now, I was dishonest in the moment and did not tell the producers, hey, I had a panic attack. Because this was in 2004 and 2005. We were not as at and at the kind of enlightened place that we are now about accepting and being aware of mental health issues. And so I didn't feel comfortable admitting that I had had a panic attack. I did admit it to my mom, and she was a physician at the time. She's retired now. And after the first one, she got me in to see a shrink, and not much changed. After the second one, she got me in to see a better shrink, and that guy figured out what was going wrong. And what was going wrong, and this genuinely is embarrassing, uh, is that I was abusing drugs. The backstory here is that I had spent a lot of time in war zones as a young, ambitious correspondent after 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, the whole shebang. And I came home in the middle of all of this and got depressed, and then unwisely began self medicating with cocaine that made me feel better. I was not high on the air during these panic attacks, but the doctor who I saw after the second panic attack pointed out that my ambient use of cocaine, which was, pretty intermittent and not that intense, but using it once in a while as I did, changed my brain chemistry and made it more likely for me to panic. And so he got me into regular therapy and off of drugs, and that really was the beginning of me climbing out of it.
Wow, that's, I'll just say on a personal note, alcohol was my thing. I
Mm,
stopped years ago. I was thinking I'm making myself feel better, and it at the moment maybe, but it never worked out long
nope.
term.
Nope.
So, man. Well, this is really interesting. So, we got a couple minutes before we go to our first break. I love this. I kind of took this out of your book, which I love, the 10% Happier book. Is you describing yourself as a fidgety skeptic when it comes to meditation. I'm also going to say I'm a skeptic of it too, or I have been, and admit I still am a partial skeptic, and I just wonder, should I be trying this? And I should, and I haven't. It's almost embarrassing. But what happened to you in that arena? Because you're doing some, your book, the audio book at the end, I love it. We have
Mm,
meditation exercises in there.
yeah.
I started listening to this weeks ago thinking, man, this is great. Why didn't I do this before? How did you get it? How did you become a non-skeptic?
I want to hear about your skepticism, but my skepticism was conquered through science. Really seeing the many physiological and psychological and even behavioral benefits that can ensue from small daily doses of meditation, short daily doses of meditation. So I started with about 5 minutes a day. I think you can start with as little as a minute a day, and it's been shown to reduce your blood pressure, boost your immune system. It's been shown to help with anxiety and depression. So that got me over the hump.
Yeah, you are right about that. I know that because I've read a lot of books about it, and we have a brain health center here. And I'll tell you what, we're going to go to a break real quick. We'll be back after this short message. We'll be back with Dan Harris. Thanks again for joining me, Dan. Thanks for everybody who's listening. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. All right, everybody, we're back with my special guest, Dan Harris. He's a best-selling author of 10% Happier. I love the book. I have both the hard copy and the audio book. I listen, learn better when I'm, hearing something in audio. Maybe it's because I was a
Yeah.
musician for so long for a career.
Yeah.
But I love the exercises at the end, which I actually started doing some of them.
You said you were a skeptic. What do you mean? Like what are you skeptic? Are you skeptical about the
Oh,
benefits, or are you skeptical about your ability to do it?
my ability. Thank you very much. You picked it right up. No, it's not of whether it's going to work. Can I actually do it? And actually, I'd love to direct this question towards you. I will tell you that one thing I've learned, and I'd love to hear your experience on this, is I thought you need to have a mind that is not active at all when you're meditating. And that is just not going to happen. But I also found out it doesn't need to be like that.
No, no.
So I'm learning slowly to just calm a lot of the outside sources. I still have voices running in my head, but can you tell us about your experience getting into that? And how do you, when you were a skeptic, what were you skeptical of? And how did that evolve into what you're doing now?
Well, I was more skeptical than you are. I at first thought it was just hippie nonsense. So seeing the science that we discussed earlier was a big thing for me. And then I think I probably had, I can't remember exactly, but I think I probably had some skepticism about whether I could do it. But learning the next thing that I'm about to say to you, and which directly addresses your concerns, really, really helped me. So here it is. As I like to say, enlightenment, sorry, as I like to say, clearing your mind is impossible unless you're enlightened or you've died. So this is the most pernicious, harmful misconception about meditation, that you have to stop all of your thinking. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And maybe it will happen at the deep, deep end of the pool of like really advanced meditators. But for the vast majority of us, meditation is going to involve sitting quietly, closing our eyes, trying to focus on one thing. Usually it's the feeling of your breath coming in and out. You're not deep breathing, you're just feeling the breath as it naturally occurs. And then as soon as you try to do this, you're going to get distracted a million times with random thoughts. Where do gerbils run wild? What's for lunch? When do I need a haircut? But whatever. You're planning a homicide, whatever it is. This is random coursing thoughts. And the whole goal is just to notice when you become distracted and to start again and again and again. And
Mhm.
that starting again is the practice. That's not doing it wrong, that's doing it right. And so that I really try to reframe that moment of waking up from distraction, because in that moment, a lot of people tell themselves the story about how they're failed meditators, but that is proof of success. If you can sit there, try to focus for a few nanoseconds at a time on your breath coming in and out, and then get distracted a million times, and every time you wake up, know, oh, bingo, yes, success. I've spotted my distraction, and now I'm going back to my breath or whatever it is I've chosen to focus on. Why is that a success? Because the goal of meditation is not to reach some special state, but to become familiar with how wild your mind is. And once you realize how crazy your mind is, and you start to develop some self awareness about that, well,
Mhm.
then all of your thoughts don't need to be taken so seriously. Every time some neurotic compulsion marches through your mind, you don't need to act it out blindly. You don't need to say something that's going to ruin the next 48 hours of your marriage just because you had the thought to say it. You don't need to eat a sleeve of Oreos just because the urge arose.
Mhm.
You can develop a warm distance,
Mhm.
you know, a warm sort of friendly self awareness with the contents of your mind, so that you don't take it all so seriously. That is the end game, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great, great advice. My gosh. Because that compulsive I have compulsive tendencies to do exactly that. Oreos are great. Cheese, could eat a block of cheese. That'll
I hear
clog
you.
up my pores nicely, right? um so okay, in that broadcasting world, especially when you're in the war zones and things, I mean, I don't know, I don't have any idea. I just do behind the microphone a radio show. I've never done TV. but you're out there, you're in the field, you're probably wearing helmets half the time in some of these places, and your life could be at stake, literally. Do you ever find, or did you ever find that you needed the meditation during those times, or some people it seems they need more meditation when it's a quieter time, when they're not as distracted with something, it could even be life threatening. How did that affect you in your daily routine? Meaning, were you implementing it into your daily routine meditation, that is, no matter what, or is it, does it come and go?
Um, I'm a bit of a mutant when it comes to habit formation. I'm actually unusually disciplined in that when I start a habit, I'm pretty good at sticking to it. Having said that, that is extremely rare, and for most people really struggle to boot up a habit. And so
Yeah.
I I want to give you permission to be inconsistent
Mm.
and to start and stop, and that is totally normal. Uh, and just as in the practice of meditation, you have to have a sense of humor and be willing to notice when you've become distracted and start again. Well, the same is true in the process of setting up a meditation habit. You have to be cool with the fact that months might go by where you've just fallen off the wagon, and it's always fine to start again. Nothing's been lost. All the meditation you did several months ago or several years ago or whatever, it's still in you. You still
Uh-huh.
know how to do it. You still can ride the bike. And I think over time, if you're just consistently willing to try every time you fall off the wagon to try again, I think over time it may get more consistent. But even if it never does and you just do it intermittently for the rest of your life, I think you're better off than if you never did it.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is research out of MIT that shows brain imaging um, during and then after months and months of regular meditation, and what happens in the neural pathways that are created in your brain, and how your brain sort of reshapes itself. I know you know about neuroplasticity and all this kind of thing. So the science part, I'm sold on that as my ability to do things. I love the idea of giving myself permission to maybe not do so well and then just work at it, keep doing it. How did the 10% happier title come about? Because that's a catchy title. I really like that.
Thank you. It came about because I was getting interested in meditation way before it was uh, cool. So it got cool in the 60s and 70s, and then it fell off. And by 2008 or 9, when I started nosing around in the meditation world, it was not a culturally acceptable thing to admit that you
Okay.
did. Um, and I started to see the research that showed it was really good for you, and had this sense that, oh, okay, maybe there's first of all, I find the practice helpful for myself, and second, I had this entrepreneurial feeling like, oh, maybe I could do something here, because most of these meditation books that I'm reading are a little bit annoying. They have a very specific tone to them, and so maybe I should write a book that uses inappropriate language and tells embarrassing stories, and see if I can get skeptics interested, because most people were way more skeptical then than they are now. And so to answer your actual question, I was talking to a friend of mine at work one day, and she said, well, like, why are you meditating? What's the matter with you? And I said, oh, because it makes me like 10% happier. I just blurted it out, and
There
I
it
could see
is.
the look on her face changed, and I realized that's my shtick.
Hey, that's pretty cool. I like that a lot. Wait, I just had a thought. I lost it. Well, I'll find it on the break. Speaking of break, folks, we're gonna go to a break, and when we come back, we'll talk more with my special guest, Dan Harris, author of 10% Happier. Love the book. And you also have the podcast. You've got some great guests on that. A lot of great things happening on the
Thank you.
10% Happier podcast. So you're listening to Your Health Matters right here on the iHeart Network. And thank you so much for listening. We'll be back soon. Okay, we're back. This is Your Health Matters. My name is Carl Sterling. We are with my special guest, Dan Harris. 10% Happier. I like how that title came about, my friend. That's really cool. So, curious, after, let's say, years now, years of mindfulness, practicing and teaching mindfulness and meditation. How has it changed for you in dealing with, and do you still have, do you experience anxiety or do you ever have panic attacks? How is, I should say, maybe your relationship with anxiety evolved or changed?
Okay, so I'll take them in order. Anxiety and panic are linked in that panic is kind of anxiety on steroids. But I'll start with anxiety and then I'll talk about panic. I absolutely still have anxiety. I think that is like a factory setting, but my relationship to it has changed immensely, um, where I'm less likely to be owned by it or taken over by it. It still happens, for
Yeah.
sure. Ask
Mm-hmm.
anybody I'm close to, professionally or personally, they'll definitely say I have a tendency. Dan has a tendency toward anxiety. I just at my after 15 years of meditation, I also do therapy. I'm a little bit more self-aware. I would say significantly more self-aware, and then therefore less caught by it. Panic uh, is harder to deal with because once your brain gets good at panic, it's once it learns how to panic, it's just kind of that habit is deeply entrenched, and the
Yeah.
experience of panic is so strong that I don't think hurling yourself into the lotus position and meditating it away. I have not had much luck with that. Um, I would say that uh, in from until recently, I did not experience much panic. I had a tough work situation where I was separating from my co-founders at a meditation app that I started, and that was
Mm-hmm.
a long, difficult process. There were no bad guys. It was just we couldn't see eye to eye in some things, and so we ended up separating, and that provoked a lot of anxiety, and actually started it brought my panic attacks back.
Oh.
And I was a
Mm-hmm.
little embarrassed. I've talked about this publicly, and I was a little embarrassed. I'm supposed to be this meditation guy, happiness quasi expert, and having panic attacks on airplanes and in elevators. It really was around claustrophobia.
Mm-hmm.
But I've come to a different view on that now, which is that panic is a super strong physiological, psychological phenomenon, um, and it is workable. It has come back for me, and I've found that through things like exposure therapy, where you try to expose yourself to the thing that scares you in sane and systematic and small doses. I've been able to really improve. So I try to look for opportunities to take an elevator because I know that I'm sort of inoculating myself against panic.
Sure.
But it's still there and it's still a thing I wrestle with. I don't want people to hear that and get discouraged. I want you to hear that and say, "Oh, well, this is a difficult fact of life for some people. It is workable, but it can be hard."
Absolutely. That's great advice. I know there's an old Brian Tracy saying, face what you fear, and the the death of fear is certain at some point, right? So I think
Yeah.
looking for those opportunities for the elevator, it's what a lot of us need to do in respect. What do you say, figuratively speaking? I have three more things I'd like to touch on in our last, let's say, 6 minutes or so here. The Dalai Lama. You had a meeting with the Dalai Lama. Also, want to know if you have a particular takeaway message for our listeners, and you have a new website you're going to be starting up. So let's go back and start with the Dalai Lama. You met the
Okay.
Dalai Lama. I love the story of the encounter with the Dalai Lama in your book. You share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah. I went. My history is I spent 30 years as a news reporter, and I retired a couple of years ago. But I have a sort of well trained skepticism, and so I went into my first encounter with the Dalai Lama thinking, uh, my job is to see through people I had interviewed, cult leaders and terrorists and murderers, and
Yeah,
I
sure.
didn't think he was any of those things, but I was ready to be disappointed. However, he is truly awesome in my opinion,
Uh-huh.
and One of the things I really like about him is even though, his public persona and public perception of him is this guy in robes who's dispensing wisdom and giggling a lot, and that's all true. But if you ask him straight up, hey, do you ever get into a bad mood? You ever get angry? He'll be like, yes, I do. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
And to me, if you combine the fact that he says incredibly smart and helpful things with the fact that he's has no pretense that I can see,
Yeah.
yeah, it adds up to
That's
a good
beautiful.
impression. Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. So when we look at the whole picture here, and your book really says it all, okay? But in maybe in a few words in a couple of minutes, if you had one piece of advice or a couple pieces of advice, top of the list advice for listeners, what is your takeaway message?
This isn't so much advice as it is excellent news. Uh, Advice flows out of this insight, but the insight itself is foundational and positive, which is that the brain and by extension the mind are trainable.
Mm.
The things you don't like about yourself, anxiety, depression, sadness, jealousy, anger, whatever it is, these are not factory settings that are unalterable. They're factory settings that are workable. And there are many ways by which you can train the mind. Meditation is one of them, therapy, nature, exercise,
Sure.
relationship, but any positive relationship or even a negative relationship can be a training of the mind if you look at it the right way.
True.
My good news is that you can learn to do life better, and that I think should be reassuring.
That's a beautiful quote. You can learn to do life better. That says a lot in one sentence. I love that one. I'm going to steal that, adopt it, and give you credit for it. Thank you. Seriously, that just opened up my eyes on something there. And you have a new website. Can you tell us about that? It's coming soon, right? In the near future, you're
It's
launching
it's
something.
up and running. It's been
Oh,
as we record this, it's been exactly a week since I launched it. As I mentioned, I used to have a meditation app.
yes.
Um, we had a difficult split. The co-founders and I had a difficult split, and I am starting a new thing. It's called danharris.com. If you go to, you can either enter that into your browser, or you can go to Substack and search for me. My name. Basically, it's a community of people who take this stuff seriously. And if you want to be able to chat with me and with experts and with other people who take this stuff seriously, you can do so. You'll also get like a gentle IV drip of wisdom bombs in your email from me a couple times a week, and video chats with me and guided meditations. There's a
Oh,
whole. It's a whole. I don't. I call it a community. I sometimes jokingly call it a cult. It's basically just a membership program for people who want to learn simple, science based ways to do life better.
love it. That's great, man. We'll make sure it's in the description of the show and the podcast. danharris.com. Dan, thanks, man. I really, really appreciate you joining me. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you for having me for your great questions. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. I know that our listeners do. And I want to thank everybody who listens to this show. I appreciate your very positive feedback that we're getting every week. And it's an honor to talk with Dan, learn, and I'm going to do life better. I'm going to love that one, man. Thank you. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. Thank you again, Dan. And until next week, everybody, remember, keep moving, move your body, use your brain, challenge yourself every single day. It's the pathway to longevity. Have a great week.